In 1957, a demolition crew began tearing down the west wing of Letchworth Village, a sprawling institution tucked deep in the Hudson Valley of New York. It was the kind of place built to look peaceful from the outside. Stone buildings, quiet courtyards, ivy crawling up walls like prayerful fingers. The job was supposed to take 2 weeks. It took 7, because by day 3, the men stopped working. They said they heard music, faint and melodic, coming from inside a sealed hallway. A song that didn't seem to come from any machine. It didn't echo, it hovered. And no matter how many bricks they tore down, it never got louder or stopped. The crew's foreman, Vincent Moretti, finally called in local officials. They broke through a final plaster wall behind Ward C and found a narrow passage. At the end was a door. The number 7 had been carved into it backward. Behind that door they discovered a small chamber, 12 tiny beds, 12 pairs of shoes, neatly lined beneath them. Wax from melted candles had pooled across the wooden floor. At the center stood a rusted phonograph, the needle still resting on a cracked disc, but there were no wires, no speakers, and no one had set foot in that room in over 3 decades. There were no bodies, but something had been there. A memo sent to the New York State Health Board 2 days later reads simply, "Do not proceed with further excavation until all sound ceases." It never did, because even today, if you stand near the ruins of that wing and listen carefully just past 3:03 a.m., you might hear it, a hymn, sung in Latin by voices too young and too many to still be alive. Before we pull back the curtain on Room 7, I want to hear from you. What state or country are you watching from? And have you ever stepped into an abandoned place and felt like something was listening? Tell me in the comments. I read every one, and if you're new here, this channel doesn't just tell ghost stories. We uncover what history tried to bury, and the voices that were never meant to rise again. So if you haven't already, subscribe, because tonight, we're not just listening to echoes, we're listening to the children who never stopped singing. The stone walls were meant to protect. Instead, they muffled the screams. Letchworth Village opened in 1911, though the land had been purchased back in 1907, under the New York State Commission for the Care of the Feeble-Minded. At the time, it was considered revolutionary. A cottage-style layout meant to replace the grim prison-like asylums of the 19th century. Nestled in the wooded hills of Rockland County, the 2,362-acre property was dotted with stone cottages, dirt roads, and quiet paths connecting wards, labeled only by letters: Ward A, Ward C, Ward F. It looked peaceful, serene, even, and that's exactly what newspapers printed. But inside it was another story. By 1914, over 700 patients were confined there. By 1920, the number had tripled. Many of the most vulnerable were children, not only orphans, but also kids with epilepsy, polio, speech disorders, and those considered incorrigible, which at the time could mean anything from backtalk to being left-handed. The children's wing, officially Ward C1, was a narrow rectangular building with tall windows and a fenced courtyard. State records from 1917 show that it held 48 children under age 12, with just 2 full-time attendants. But a blue pencil note in the margin of one report said it all. Room 7 sealed. No further access. Observation ended March 1919. Room 7 wasn't on the public blueprints. It only appeared in maintenance logs, always in red ink, always underlined. Some staff called it the choir room. Others more fearfully called it the quiet cellar, even though no cellar existed under Ward C. The story began during the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918. As children fell sick, 12 were isolated inside room 7. Food trays were slid through a hatch. Nurses wore gauze masks. But something strange began. The children sang, faint at first, then in unison in Latin hymns no one had taught them. Some hadn't even spoken before. Yet every night at 3:07 a.m. their voices echoed, always the same melody. When staff finally entered in March 1919, they expected corpses. Instead, they found 12 children upright, eyes open, mouths silently moving. Within 72 hours, all were declared dead. No autopsies, no graves. Room 7 was sealed. One confidential report later stated, the song continued after respiration ceased. The hallway was rerouted. Nurses were told it was a collapsed pantry. But rumors spread of singing heard through weeds, of melted candle wax found where no candles were allowed. By 1930, Letchworth was both praised and feared, used for vaccine testing by the Rockefeller Institute, yet notorious for rags, overcrowding, and silence. Because Letchworth didn't sleep at night, it waited, and somewhere behind those crumbling walls, room 7 was still singing. Voices are harder to silence when no one admits they existed. The records begin in 1935, with the transfer of nurse Eloise Harper to Letchworth Village from Kings Park State Hospital. She was 26, sharp-minded, and unusually devout. Her letters to her brother, a parish priest, described her new position as a calling, a chance to bring God's touch to children abandoned by both family and medicine. She was assigned to Ward C, the same that once held room 7. The hallway had changed since 1919. The original western wing was plastered over, and a supply closet now stood where the entrance had once been. But Eloise noticed something immediately. The children in her ward never stepped near that part of the corridor. Even the most unruly avoided it like an invisible line had been drawn in chalk. Within her first week, she documented strange patterns. The children refused to sing. Even when coaxed with piano games or nursery songs like "You Are My Sunshine," their mouths would move, but no sound came out. At night, several cried into their pillows, repeating the same phrase, "They'll hear us, they'll make us sing again." Eloise attributed this to trauma, until the night she heard it herself. October 12, 1935, she wrote in her journal, "At 3:07 a.m., I woke to what I believed was a choir, soft voices, steady rhythm, as though from beneath the floor. The other nurses claimed to hear nothing. I am not mad." The next night, Eloise stayed up on purpose. She lit a candle, tucked a rosary into her apron, and waited. At exactly 3:07, it came 12 voices, harmonizing in Latin. She couldn't understand the words, but the tone chilled her. Not mournful, not joyful, obedient. She requested access to old blueprints. Mr. Driscoll, an elderly clerk, turned pale when she asked about room 7. No such place, he insisted. Just old plaster and bad wiring. But Eloise persisted, and within days, a torn blueprint arrived. Behind the west wall was a corridor, and a room stamped faintly, room 7, choir. She began asking questions, too many. A senior nurse warned her. The director urged her to focus on living patients. Her mail was opened, her journals torn. Still she pressed on. The children changed. They whispered in sleep, not English, but Latin and Aramaic, answering to names that weren't their own. One girl, Margaret Ann Boyle, age 7, drew disturbing images: mouthless faces, hands dripping wax, circles within circles. Across a doorway in one drawing was written, Lux Silentium. Her brother responded, "That is not a child's hand." In December 1935, heavy rains flooded the West Wing. During cleanup, 2 orderlies knocked a hole in the plaster, revealing a bricked corridor. No lights, no vents. At the end, a door. The number 7, carved backwards. Eloise wasn't allowed near demolition, but she snuck in with a flashlight. Inside were 12 rusted beds, folded blankets, a phonograph, and thick candle wax on the floor. All 12 pairs of children's shoes remained, neatly aligned. When she touched one, it was warm. That night, Eloise collapsed. When she awoke 2 days later, her voice was hoarse, as if she'd been screaming. The report listed hysteria due to overwork. She was sent home on leave. Her final unsent letter was found years later in a sealed envelope. They are not just memories, they are songs, and they are still singing because we buried them with mouths open. They never stopped. From 1918 to 1962, scattered documents uncovered from sealed archives paint a chilling picture of what happened in Room 7 at Letchworth Village. A recovered memo dated January 1919, penned by attendant Sarah Kemper, describes 12 isolated children who, without instruction, began vocalizing in unison at precisely 3:07 a.m. Their lips moved continuously with no emotion, in a language unrecognized. By April, a state memo stamped "Do not duplicate" concluded all 12 had ceased respiration on March 22nd, yet their vocal cords vibrated for 96 minutes afterward. A phonograph began spinning without power, prompting authorities to order the room sealed in concrete and erased from all future records. In 1935, Nurse Eloise Harper recorded that a boy with a birthmark repeatedly drew circles, always 12, and whispered, "They stand behind it," before releasing a note that shook her to her core. The walls dripped candle wax, though none were lit. A blueprint from 1910 marked Room 7 as the Children's Harmony Therapy Unit, with an adjacent auditory isolation unit. Scribbled annotations read, "Closed per order. Vocal perseveration unresolved." A 1962 interview with former patient Lillian Grace Hendricks recounts Room 7 being called the mouth, a space that sang back and bled noses if listened to too long. She claimed she once saw 12 children in gowns, mouths open, standing silently, yet music played as though behind or inside them. In a desperate 1936 letter, Brother Paul Harper warned the diocese that his sister Eloise had become unwell, ranting about songs that trap and sacred symbols that burn to touch. A Letchworth administrative ledger redacted multiple entries, including one for Margaret Boyle marked deceased with the note "Mouth ceased, breath intact." Others, like Clara Hughes, were transferred to St. Agnes' silent program. No funerals, no press. A reconstructed 1959 audio log allegedly captured at 3:07 a.m. features a faint voice whispering, "Lux Silentium," followed by 12 voices harmonizing in Latin, ending abruptly with a metallic clatter. Compiled decades later, in the so-called Ashcroft dossier, private research concluded Room 7 wasn't merely therapeutic. It was a ritual containment site. The phrase "Lux Silentium," or "light of silence," was repeatedly found across documents, All evidence, written, spoken, and heard, suggests 12 children were not just isolated, they were transformed. They sang before death, they sang after, and while the room remains sealed, the choir is not silent. By the mid-1950s, Letchworth Village had become a place of crumbling walls and evaporating staff. But it was the West Wing that terrified even the most indifferent orderlies. In 1956, reports began of the humming, faint vibrations at 3:07 a.m., tools rattling, and light bulbs exploding hours after installation. The power grid was redone thrice by 1957, but blackouts persisted near Ward C, always accompanied by sudden chills and static-charged air. Nurses began to report a stranger terror, humming, but inside patients, one even heard four-part harmony through a stethoscope. She quit that day. By May 1957, Room 7, supposedly sealed, began bleeding, red smears appearing on its door. Nurse Colleen Merrow noted in her journal a heavy silence and warmth that contradicted the freezing air outside. On May 13th, the door to Room 7 was found ajar. 12 child-sized footprints circled a phonograph that no one admitted to placing. Concrete was poured again, reinforced with rebar. 3 nights later, the singing resumed. On June 3rd, 1957, orderly Leonard Hayes vanished, uniform folded, shoes beside the phonograph, a note reading, "The song is not for us. We are only the breath." Demolition was ordered June 13th, but tools wouldn't penetrate the final plaster. Workers heard giggling, and one man disappeared, his lunch left beside a child's shoes. At 3:07 a.m. on June 15th, journalist Ellis Rhine captured audio chimes, a child whispering, "He's here." 12 voices in Latin, then a thud as the camera fell. Rhine was found catatonic, eyes open. The footage was seized. Room 7 was resealed under welded steel, marked by crosses. In July, an anonymous letter to the Hudson Valley Times read, "Room 7 was never a room. It's a note, a pitch, a frequency in the dirt." August 3rd, 1957, Dr. Franklin Reese declared, "There is no Room 7, but between 1960 and 1971, police logged 17 complaints, voices in trees, singing in basements, lights in shattered windows, all dismissed." In 1975, urban explorer Roger D'Angelo snuck in. At 3:07 a.m., his flashlight died. He heard the choir. Doors sealed behind him. He saw candlelight through a vent, shadows too small to be his. He vanished. His journal was mailed from Connecticut, smelling of wax and old wood. Letchworth closed in 1996. Today the West Wing is fenced, rusted, forgotten, but some claim the song still plays. 12 voices, every night. At 3:07 a.m., whether or not you're listening, some horrors scream, others whisper, but the deepest ones, the ones that settle into our bones, are the ones that sing. Room 7 at Letchworth Village was never simply about murder or ghosts. It was about obedience, ritual, and the transformation of innocence into harmony. What haunted the workers and cracked the minds of the staff wasn't violence, but sound, not loud, never loud, but always perfectly in tune. The choir of Room 7 didn't cry out, they sang, softly, methodically, always together at precisely 3:07 a.m. This is where the true horror lies. Theme 1. The weaponization of sound. Music, our most human form of beauty, was corrupted, used as control, each note a rule, each harmony a replacement for identity. By the time their songs were flawless, the children were no longer children. They had become vessels. Theme 2 reveals the silence of the state. Ghosts didn't do the worst damage. Silence did. The silence of nurses who saw too much, the administrators who moved files, the officials who sealed records, and the public that never asked. Letchworth became a mausoleum of truth, buried beneath policy. The choir sang, but no one came. Theme 3, Innocence Rewritten. There's a primal horror in watching obedience turn dark. These children didn't fight, they complied, they harmonized, they smiled as they disappeared. We're told to fear shadows and monsters, but Room 7 teaches us to fear soft voices singing wrong notes in the dark. Theme 4 confronts respectable evil. Letchworth wasn't a dungeon. It had chaplains, doctors, tours, and yet, beneath its west wing, something monstrous thrived, not hidden, but ignored. The horror was clothed in policy and prayer. Today, people don't flee the ruins, they mourn them. Because the buildings didn't fail, people did. Theme 5 explores the persistence of memory. Most records are gone, most witnesses silenced, yet the memory remains. Explorers still hear singing, see wax pooling, and report finding tiny shoes that weren't there the week before. Dreams echo with visions of 12 children, mouths closed, somehow still singing. Because memory is a ghost, and Room 7's memory refuses to die. Perhaps the most chilling line wasn't spoken aloud, but written, in a child's hand, in a half-burned hymnal beneath the floorboards, in 1963. We do not scream, we do not cry, we sing our names, until we die. The choir didn't want rescue, they wanted to be heard, and they still are. In 1964, after a local journalist named Philip Krauss attempted to publish a serialized expose on the west wing of Letchworth Village, the New York State Department of Mental Hygiene quietly opened an internal legal inquiry. It lasted only 3 weeks. No subpoenas, no on-site investigations, and no charges filed. The official report concluded, no evidence found to substantiate claims of abuse or structural irregularities in Ward C. Yet off the record, strange things began to unfold. Krauss suffered a nervous breakdown 3 days after meeting with the board, found muttering, "There were 12, always 12. I heard them in my bones," while clutching a weathered hymnal. His article never saw print. 2 nurses relocated to Canada. 3 others refused to testify, one citing a matter of spiritual contagion. The facility's original blueprints from 1908 to 1910 mysteriously vanished, specifically those for the West Wing. When questioned, the archivist responded, "We don't talk about Room 7. In a fictional court transcript from 1965, Dr. Thomas Reed, the former director, was asked why the door to Room 7 had been welded shut with steel and etched with blessed symbols. He replied, "No one made that decision. We all just understood." "Understood what?" the attorney asked. "That the room was singing again," Reed said, before the transcript abruptly ended at 10:47 a.m. By 1970, the area was referred to internally as Zone Null, and access was revoked. No staff were allowed entry, and all documentation erased Room 7's existence. Yet every February 12th, the director's mailbox received a single unsigned note, "They are still singing." In 1974, Lorraine Chase, a 31-year-old independent researcher, received clearance to study music therapy in 20th century psychiatric care. She entered the West Wing alone. She never came out. Her melted tape recorder was found, audio intact. Her last whisper, "It's not the children who haunt this place. It's the silence they were forced into." Their song was not protest. It was permission. They were never singing to escape. They were singing to stay. Even today, visitors report hearing faint harmonies near the ruins, always at 3:07 a.m. Paranormal investigators in 2002 recorded a 12-degree cold ring inside room 7, and one audio engineer resigned after hearing her childhood lullaby in Latin on playback. So, what do you think? Did the state know? Did the doctors, the staff, the clergy all turn away? Or were they too afraid to face what they heard behind that door? Either way, 12 voices, no names, no graves, just a sealed room and a note that never dies. If stories like this make your skin crawl and make you think, don't forget to like, subscribe and share this video, and tell me in the comments, what would you have done if your child had been taken to Letchworth? Here on this channel, we don't just tell ghost stories, we exhume what history buried, the horrors locked beneath steel, silence and song. And if room 7 chilled you to the bone, next time we're heading to a forgotten nunnery in Montana, where not a single door has a handle, and the bells still ring, even though no one lives there anymore. Stay curious, stay brave, and remember, the quiet places often have the loudest secrets.